Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Nicole Kitchen, and I'm an academic trainer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. Today, we have a faculty symposium breakout session with the NCU librarians. Before we get started, if you do have any questions or comments, there is a Q&A as well as a comment box at the bottom of your screen. And if you want to go ahead and record or view this session after today, it will be uploaded to the CTL webinar library. So with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda Ziegler and the NCU librarians.
Hi, everyone. As we get started today, I'm just going to have each of the librarians who's presenting go around and introduce themselves. My name is Amanda Ziegler, and I'm the Director of Library Services here at NCU.
My name is Go ahead. Okay, my name is Amanda Bizet, and I'm a reference and instruction librarian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Moore. I'm also a reference and instruction librarian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor Duncan. I'm the instructional design librarian.
And hi, everyone. My name is Marisha Kelly. I'm a reference and instruction librarian as well.
So we are really excited to have you joining us today or viewing this via the recording. Today, we're going to be talking about the concept of information literacy. We are going to be exploring that together, what all of our different ideas are about it, because one of the things we really want to do is acknowledge the varying perspectives around information literacy so that we can begin to build a shared definition of what information literacy is.
So before we start talking about that shared definition and diving more into information literacy, we first have to consider, why do we care about it? Why is it important? And I encourage you to think about why it is important to you personally, as a professor, as a human being. And there are several reasons that I will go over on this slide, but again, think about why it is important and why we should learn more about information literacy. First of all, we care because our accreditors tell us we have to care, right? So we have to prove for our accreditors that we are doing things to educate our students on information literacy. And to demonstrate that, we do have institutional learning outcomes, and our ILO 5 does relate to information literacy. And we're going to look at that briefly on the next slide as well. Information literacy contributes to retention and completion. It produces higher quality dissertations, leading to a better reputation for North Central University. So for that reason, I think it's very important. It is ethically and legally responsible to be information literate in all aspects of life, especially as a student. So the more that we can do to help our students become information literate, the better. And finally, information literacy promotes or incorporates lifelong skills such as creativity, flexibility, forming opinions, and again, this is not just related to academic coursework, this is all areas of our life. So we can make informed decisions, whether it's politics or just deciding where we're going to go to see a movie, things like that. Information literacy skills really relate to all aspects of our life. And kind of to close out this slide, I do just want to read a quote from another university library, actually, Salve Regina University, because I think it is very powerful and kind of takes information literacy to the next level. And they say, information literacy rises to the level of possessing a worldview that acknowledges that there is a wealth of information available and that an educated citizen should possess the ability to harness it to enhance his or her own life and the lives of those around them. So it actually goes beyond the individual in this case to better people around you. So I think that that's very, very powerful. So let's talk a little bit more about that ILO 5 relating to information literacy. And we have a blank space here, and we're going to use the words determine, use, and integrate to fill in that blank. But each one is associated with a different level. So bachelor's, master's, and doctoral. So I want you to think about which word relates to which level, bachelor's, master's, or doctoral. And so the first one, for the bachelor's students will use resources in order to support a decision or address a problem. So they're definitely able to incorporate resources related to an assignment's concepts or questions. And it's great that they can do that, but it would also benefit from more evaluation. So they're at the lowest level there of being able to use those resources, but not a high level of evaluation involved with that. There can be improvement. And then for the master's level, this one is kind of tricky. It's not easy to distinguish which one would be master's or which one would be bachelor's. But for the master's level, they are able to determine resources needed in order to support a decision or address a problem. And so they purposefully select these resources to represent multiple views. So in this case, it is moving towards a true synthesis situation, but it's not quite there. At the doctoral level, they integrate resources needed in order to support a decision or address a problem. And this involves an exhaustive search for information sources. Doctoral students select sources as appropriate to the scope and discipline of the research question. So that's the highest level there.
So before we jump into a formal definition of information literacy, we would like to know what comes to mind when you think of information literacy. So go ahead and type what comes to mind in the chat box. I'm going to read those responses out loud. We'll give you a minute or so here. Again, just what comes to mind when you think of information literacy. And it's okay if nothing comes to mind. I'm not seeing anything in the chat. We'll just, oh, okay. So being aware of the information that I'm obtaining or reading, yes, that's perfect. So we'll go ahead and pull up that formal definition now for information literacy.
So the Association of College and Research Libraries in 2016 updated what used to be their standards related to information literacy and replaced them with a framework. And we'll get into the reasons for why they did that in just a moment, but they provide a really useful definition of information literacy. Information literacy is the set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, the use of information in creating new knowledge, and participating ethically in communities of learning. And that definition, like I said, is sort of the introduction to that ACRL framework. And one of the reasons that the committee that was responsible for the framework gave for moving in the direction of a framework rather than simply an updated set of standards was that information literacy, they felt, really encompassed an overlapping set of worldviews and skill sets that had to be looked at through a framework that allowed for more fluidity and a little more integration. And the reason for that is that those integrated skills that are involved in information literacy really run the gamut. We talked about synthesis at the doctoral level, but at all levels, information literacy also involves a huge dose of critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and communication skills, particularly as students are developing their own work and integrating the work of other scholars in that work. So those interconnections really support the information literacy framework, and we are going to dive into each of the 6 frames that make up that framework.
So we're going to break apart each frame and discuss it in more detail. And then after each frame, we'd like you to provide an example from your own experience or from a student experience that would apply to that specific frame. So start thinking about that. The first frame discusses how authority is constructed and contextual. Information resources reflect their creators' expertise and credibility. Information is evaluated according to information need and the context in which it will be used. So the information need may help determine the level of authority needed and is often constructed according to the community recognition of authority.
So what does that look like in practice? An information literate student initially defines different types of authority, be it a subject matter expert, a societal position, or special expertise. Next, research tools and indicators of authority are used to determine credibility. Finally, information literate students recognize that information can be perceived differently based on its format.
So what are some ways that you've recognized this amongst yourselves or amongst your students?
Well, we have folks maybe typing some things in. Yeah, hard questions on the fly today. One of the most obvious things I think that springs to mind is the peer review process. And when we're talking about authority as constructed and contextual, we often hold up peer review as the gold standard for students to use when they're locating or utilizing information. And part of thinking about how authority is constructed and contextual is exploring that idea of peer review with students so that they are able to both understand the peer review process and why peer-reviewed information might be held as the gold standard, and why in certain circumstances you may want them to use a different standard for the information that they're looking for, or a different type of information that they're looking for. And also, I think another interesting aspect of this frame that may resonate with people is also, some of the pitfalls of the peer review process, and some of the stories that we hear, particularly out of the hard sciences, where you are seeing some really detailed review of even peer-reviewed work. So I think those are all important conversations that relate to that frame.
I think that's a great example, Amanda. Let's go on to our next frame, which is about information creation as a process. So information conveys a message and is shared through various delivery methods, and we're seeing that more and more as technology develops. Information literate students understand that creation is an evolving process, and as well as the process's significance. This leads to the realization that information creations are valued differently within different contexts, such as academia or the workplace.
So again, in practice, information literate students acknowledge the allowances and limitations of the creation process. Students are able to assess the fit between the information's creation process and the particular information need. And once again, the student is able to recognize that information can be perceived differently based on its format.
So how are some ways you've seen this in practice?
Give people a couple of seconds here to put things in and respond, but I did want to highlight, while folks are thinking about information creation as a process, this is something, I think this combined with the first frame is an example of how the frames overlap, because I think John had raised the point that non-peer-reviewed material is often valuable, and I think the information creation as a process overlaps with that idea, which came up as part of the authority is constructed and contextual conversation. Letting our students, particularly those doctoral students who are in the process of creating their own scholarly communication in the form of their dissertation, helping them to really recognize how information can be perceived differently based on how it's formatted, and thinking about what is the best format for a particular line of inquiry or a particular piece of information is definitely central to the work that happens in the dissertation.
Okay, so the third frame focuses on the value of information. The ACRL has recognized that information is a commodity. It is a means of education, a means to influence, and information literate students will be able to understand that publishing practices, access to information, the commodification of personal information, and intellectual property laws are part of the evolving creation process.
So once again, in practice, what that would look like is that information literate students give credit to original ideas through proper citation. They understand that intellectual property is a legal and social construct that varies by culture. Finally, information literate students are able to articulate the purpose and characteristics of copyright, fair use, open access, as well as the public domain.
So students may not be able to recognize this right off the bat, but as they progress throughout their dissertation process or their writing experience and move forward onto more scholarly publishing, they may understand this idea a little bit better. So what are some ways you've seen this in your own practice or amongst alumni that have connected with you?
I think that for this particular frame, particularly we see the concern, which, Sherry mentioned alumni, and I think that's something that we in the library see, and I'm sure that you all see as faculty, is the concern amongst students of what they're going to do after their dissertation. Will they be maybe turning that into further publication opportunities for themselves? How are they going to continue to share that information and to engage and to really increase the value of the work that they've done? I think this is also an example where we can go back to that idea that Amanda introduced at the beginning of the webinar about the sort of the citizenship aspect of information literacy, because when we talk about information having value, we just have to scan the headlines to understand that the information that we post and share, perhaps on social media, has value, not only to us and to our followers, but also to the companies that are running the social media platforms that we're sharing that information on. And I think that is also something that's important for our students to understand.
The next frame focuses on research as inquiry. Research is iterative and depends on complex questions. An information literate student understands that inquiry is a process that focuses on problems or specific questions. The student understands that debate and dialogue are necessary to deepen the conversations around knowledge. And finally, the student has acquired the strategic perspectives on inquiry and a larger repertoire of investigative methods.
So in practice, information literate students are able to determine the appropriate scope of investigation and break down complex research by forming simple questions. Students then use acquired research methods based on need, circumstance, and type of inquiry.
Often as a librarian, I've seen students approach that one-size-fits-all type of research strategy. Where's that one perfect article that's going to answer my very complex question? And I'm sure you as faculty have seen maybe a similar expectation. What are some ways you've been able to guide students along this process and help them meet that frame of research as inquiry?
Sherry, I love that example of the perfect article, because I think that that really does get to the heart of this particular frame, and that students have to see themselves as an integral part of the research process, that their work in piecing things together and synthesizing the information and the sources that they find is just as key as the articles or other material that they're using to support a thesis or to undergird their own research.
Absolutely. And that leads us into our next frame, research, scholarship as conversation. So from personal experience, research has never been a linear process for me. I've had to dialogue with others and get insight from my community and my peers. And the ACRL, has recognized that. Within communities of scholars, researchers, or professionals, ideas are formulated, debated, and weighed against one another.
So in practice, information literate students engage in this discourse through citing work of fellow colleagues, experts, and researchers. Students contribute to scholarly conversation at an appropriate level, as well as constructively evaluate contributions by others within participating fields.
One of the things I really appreciate about NCU is the Commons. It gives the students the opportunity to participate in scholarship as conversations. How have you seen this frame work out within the Commons, amongst your students, amongst yourselves?
I'll chime in with an answer to that question while everyone is kind of thinking through maybe some interactions that you have seen amongst your own students. One of the things that I find most exciting is when someone will post about a, particular topic that they're thinking about for their dissertation, or perhaps an article that they've found or something that they're searching for, and you have other students chiming in to, either help them find something if they're in search of something, or to discuss their own thoughts on a subject. And I love seeing that conversation play out. I think the other librarians will also agree with me. When we are working one-on-one with dissertation students in research consults, often we show them, if they haven't already experienced it, how to search just amongst North Central University dissertations within the ProQuest dissertations and theses database. And one of the things that always excites me is how excited students are not only to see, hey, here's a dissertation, it's published in a real database, it was written by someone who is in the same program that I am going to be at this point someday when I've completed my dissertation, but also to see them finding the linkages with what their own research is. And so seeing them build that, amongst other students who have walked the path before them is always really exciting as well.
Finally, our sixth frame focuses on searching as strategic exploration. Again, research is nonlinear. It's often extremely messy, frustrating, not organized at times, and the ACRL definitely recognizes that. And they understand that searching requires the mental flexibility to pursue alternate avenues in order, as new understanding develops. Information literate students conduct research that identifies possible relevant sources as well as the means to access those sources. The research is contextualized and complex and is affected by the cognitive, affective, and social dimensions of the searcher.
In practice, information literate students determine the initial scope of the task required to meet information needs. They identify interested parties who might produce information about a topic, and they design and refine strategies as needed.
Our final question, how have you seen this in action with your students, with yourself? How have you mastered the strategic exploration of your research? Any tips for anybody watching?
I think, Sherry, that when we demonstrate to students the use of Google Scholar, and specifically using Google Scholar to find the citing resources, that's a great example of strategic exploration, because as soon as you see the citing articles, those articles have citing articles. So it kind of takes you on a different path that you wouldn't have taken, in another resource. So that they seem to get really excited about. And so I feel like that's a valuable means for them to find not only find research, but kind of get excited about it when they see that these articles are related, and I can keep going and going and going with this. And once they build those skills, they also have the confidence on top of that excitement, which is great.
Yes, and Google Scholar alerts. Those are great too.
So for our next slide, we want to kind of take into context these 6 frames and really how we apply it to information literacy and develop an understanding of our own biases and perspectives. So we have the student perspectives and then some faculty staff perspectives. And the student perspectives actually come from the mindsets of learning from Dr. Julie Schell, who's a learning experience designer from the University of Texas at Austin. And she's done significant work on the science of learning. I actually had an opportunity to sit in on one of her presentations about students' mindsets, which she described as firm, inaccurate, and persistent. And these points relate overall to what we have observed in helping students with research and relate to information literacy overall. So from the student perspective, this is basically related to how students interpret information and the actions associated with locating, evaluating, and using information. So students believe that learning is easy, and this comes into context where, research should be easy. I've got a handle on my topic. I know what I need to find. But in actuality, researching is a complex and challenging process. It's not linear, it's not ABC, it's kind of messy, and you're exploring different sources and getting to know the types of information that are out there to support your topic. And then again, different strategies and keywords and sources will yield different results in terms of how we apply that information. And then the second is that students often use non-optimal learning strategies. So it's the belief that they can learn by putting information in their brains. So, by memorization, for example, but really students learn by putting things out of their brain through application and evaluation. And it's the thought of learning by doing. So when we relate this to research or the act of researching, students have to develop an understanding of those strategies and apply them so that they can better locate or evaluate the sources related to their topic. And then the last one is that students often view learning as a banking model. Basically, we tell them and they tell us back, but really learning should be self-directed, and we as faculty and staff act as guides. And this is no different with conducting research, and I think some of my colleagues can empathize with the fact that we do get chats and reference queries from students saying, how do I find information on this? And really what they're searching for is the answer, the perfect structured search to find, as we were saying, that one perfect article that summarizes their entire topic in a nutshell. So again, sometimes the expectation is to tell me how to research, but what we can do is really provide them with the tools and the strategies to help them do this and to become effective researchers and overall information literate. And then from the faculty and staff perspective, I've felt this before where, students ask me about a particular topic and I'm like, oh, wow, that's such an easy topic to research. But I have to recognize that from the student standpoint, there may be a level of difficulty or they're hitting a roadblock. So it's really about normalizing research as a difficult and evolving process, and really reiterating to students that there is no right or wrong way to do research or arrive at information, that there are only, different skills that we can employ, strategies that we can use, and sources that we consult. So again, there's no one right answer, and it's not just a simple, easy button that we can hit to get to that information. And then the second perspective from faculty and staff that we can kind of recognize is that students know how to perform research. But again, we have to develop that understanding that research topics vary, and so does a student's level of expertise based on the topic. So, based on that topic, they can be a novice or they can be an expert, and there's everything in between. And then the last is that instruction of information literacy is the sole responsibility of XYZ person or department, but in actuality, it's really a shared responsibility where we're all working collectively to help students become creative problem solvers and harness those integral skills to help them become information literate. So kind of going through some of these perspectives, are there any perspectives that you resonate with you, that you kind of see in students that you're working with? And we'll give everyone a minute to answer. But again, it's just about developing that understanding that, information literacy is affected by our own biases and perspectives, and that we can all work collectively to kind of recognize these and support others.
So we've talked a lot about what information literacy means to us. We've talked about the framework, but what can we do now? What can we do today? We can, first of all, learn more, and we can visit the ACRL Framework for Information Literacy Sandbox. That is a resource that has a repository of materials related to the framework, including lesson plans, instructional materials, professional development resources, and research on understanding and using the framework within the classroom setting and on the programmatic level. So at the end of the presentation, I believe we include a link to our information literacy LibGuide, and that is going to include a link to the ACRL framework sandbox, as well as a lot of additional resources, books, articles, websites, etc. We can begin to develop curriculum maps. What are your students' needs? What do they already know? What concepts are currently being taught? We can design criteria to assess student learning and information literacy related assignments, and write course learning outcomes with the framework in mind. And finally, you can contact the librarians. Just like Marisha said, we have a shared responsibility for helping our students to become information literate. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We would love to collaborate with you on ensuring that your course assignments do help to increase information literacy and maybe incorporate the framework. Taylor Duncan is here to support you in her role as the instructional design librarian as well, and she would like to talk to you just briefly about one of the services that she offers.
Thanks, Amanda. And I do recognize some names among the attendees, so I apologize if you've already heard me give this spiel, but I do offer now an ID librarian consultation service, and I'm putting that link in the chat. So please know, as Amanda mentioned, we're here to help. We're here to collaborate with the ID Librarian Consultation Service. We can talk about locating, integrating, and reviewing NCU library resources and services for your course, and ensuring that we are touching upon information literacy outcomes.
Thank you, Taylor. So I put the link in the chat to our LibGuide on information literacy that links to many of the resources that we talked about today, but it's also right here on the slide for you as well. So please visit that guide, and as Amanda and Taylor said, reach out to us with any questions that you have. We're here to collaborate with you and with our students as they're walking along this path to becoming information literate as graduate students. So if anyone has any questions, we're happy to take those. Otherwise, that's all for our webinar today, and we want to thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
All right, I was just gonna see real quick if there was any questions, but I don't believe there are. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and thank you NCU librarians for a fantastic webinar, and I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.